But Trump earlier in the week announced that he was going to ban institutions, large institutions, and I don't know where they're going to draw the line, but he's banning large institutions from buying single-family homes, right? Because he thinks that they're driving up the prices by buying single-family homes, right? Trump has no regard whatsoever for the U.S. Constitution. That's clear. Donald Trump, hey, we want Greenland. The U.S. is going to acquire Greenland. But he's saying that, well, he'd like to buy it, but if the Danes don't cooperate and sell it to us, or, you know, the people of Greenland don't decide they want to join the United States, he's saying that military option is not ruled out. Meaning, if we can't do a deal, we're going to invade you. What's going to be powering the precious metal bull market in 2026 is going to be de-dollarization, inflation, and a highly accommodative Fed. We know that Trump, I think he said he's made his decision on which of his flunkies is going to be installed to run the printing press in mid-2026, but they are going to run it nonstop. In fact, an indication of what Trump wants to do at the Fed was shown just this week with Fannie and Freddie, the GSEs, where Donald Trump is now ordering the GSEs to purchase $200 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities. Why does he want that? Because he wants to use government to reduce mortgage rates by buying mortgages, right? It's his own kind of mini QE run through the GSEs. Now, of course, where are the GSEs going to get the $200 billion? Well, I suppose they got to take it out of treasuries, because where is that $200 billion? It's just not sitting, you know, in cash. It's probably in U.S. treasuries. And so they have to sell those treasuries to buy mortgage-backed securities, or it's money that the GSEs would have given to the U.S. government, reducing the overall deficit and the amount of U.S. treasuries that the government has to sell. But if now they're not going to get that money from Fannie and Freddie, they have to go into the market and borrow it. So this is kind of like QE, but what it is going to do is it's going to be inflationary, and it is going to push up rates on government debt as it somewhat temporarily reduces mortgage rates. It should do that in the short run. But this is an indication of what's going to happen. And, you know, by the way, you know, Trump's policies on housing are horrible. Not only trying to get more credit by having the government buy mortgages, right, which is, of course, you know, one of the main reasons we had the 2008 financial crisis was because Fannie and Freddie were the biggest buyers of subprime mortgages, and they helped to fuel that bubble. But Trump earlier in the week announced that he was going to ban institutions, large institutions, and I don't know where they're going to draw the line, but he's banning large institutions from buying single-family homes, right? Because he thinks that they're driving up the prices by buying single-family homes. I would agree that those buyers help support the price, and without those buyers, the prices will come down a bit. That's probably going to be the case. But apart from the fact that this is completely unconstitutional, right? Trump has no regard whatsoever for the U.S. Constitution. That's clear, right? I mean, the federal government has no constitutional authority to ban certain parts of the economy, certain buyers, from buying single-family homes if they want to. But what are large institutions doing with the single-family homes that they buy? They are renting them out. They are providing a service to a lot of people, because there are a lot of people who want to live in a single-family home. They just can't afford to buy one. And it's not just the price of the home.
It's a controversial take. Are large institutions actually helping renters, or are they locking families out of homeownership forever? Before we dive deeper into the real economic fallout, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want unfiltered financial truth like this.
Right, or the mortgage rate. There are a lot of other costs that come with home ownership. I mean, I know, I own a few homes. They're very expensive to maintain, right? Apart from your property taxes, you got maintenance costs, you got insurance, right? There's a lot of stuff that comes with being a homeowner. A lot of people don't have the spare cash to handle, the sudden expense. Something happens to your roof. You have a major problem with a house that requires $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, and you're living paycheck to paycheck. You just don't have that kind of extra money to deal with those things. You just assume rent. Let your landlord deal with it. The large institutions who are buying up these single-family homes, they got plenty of cash for this stuff. In fact, they got plenty of cash to buy the properties. They don't even rely on a mortgage. They pay cash. They're buying the properties, they're maintaining the properties, and they are making them available to the public who needs a place to live. And also, there are a lot of people who want some flexibility, some mobility. They don't want to be tied down to a house, because let's say you buy a house and let's say you need to move. When something happens, you get a job offer in another state. Well, how are you going to move if you own a house? You got to sell it. Try selling a house today. It takes a long time unless you're going to drastically reduce your price. But when you are a renter and you have a yearly lease, you can easily move. Worst case, you just pay out the rest of your lease. That's not that much in many cases. Or you just wait out the lease and you pick up and move. Some people, after a year lease, they go month to month, or maybe they have a year lease, but they have an out. Just give your landlord, 90 days notice, and you can, leave early or just pay a 1 month penalty to break the lease. I mean, that's nothing compared to what you pay a realtor to sell your house and how long it takes to actually find a buyer. So what Trump is going to be doing, if he actually gets away with banning institutions from buying homes, is there's going to be a drop in the supply of single-family rentals. And now what's going to happen to people who want to live in a single-family home, but they can't afford to buy it? Well, I guess they're SOL. Or maybe they can stretch and buy a house that they really can't afford, right? Because that's the only way they can get into a house now is to buy it. And then they end up defaulting on the mortgage, which is going to be government guaranteed. They end up defaulting because they don't have the money. They can't pay all the expenses. So, this shows you Trump not only doesn't understand the Constitution, doesn't understand economics, right? He knows a lot less about economics than he claims and that others try to give him credit for. The only solution to the housing affordability problem is not to try to find ways to help people overpay for homes by funneling more government credit into the mortgage market. Is letting home prices go down. That's the solution. But of course, that opens up a whole nother can of worms. But it's this kind of harebrained policy, demand, inflationary, Keynesian type policies that are going to help power the gold and silver market in 2026. Also, the weakness in the labor market. We did get the December non-farm payroll report. The jobs report came out today, weaker than expected. I mean, they expected a weak report, and it came out even weaker. The November report was also weak. That was 64,000 jobs created. That was revised down to 56,000. The consensus for December was 55,000, and that came in at 50,000.
Pay close attention to these numbers. When expectations are already low and the actual data comes in even weaker, it exposes the cracks in the economy. Schiff argues that these aren't just statistics, they are warning signs of a labor market that is far more fragile than the government admits.
Right. Now, of course, all these numbers are probably too high. They're all probably going to be revised lower in the months ahead. But these are already weak numbers. And private payrolls only rose by 37,000 in December, based on a 55,000 expectation. And the number of private sector jobs that were added last month, originally reported up 69,000. That was revised down to up just 50,000. Now, of course, all these numbers are guesstimates anyway, right? Because there's no way they're exact, right? They're just guessing. They don't really know. And I'm sure they're guessing high. But that's not a lot of jobs. We're still creating a bunch of government jobs, right? Despite all the talk about all the government jobs we're getting rid of, we're still adding these non-productive government jobs. What we're losing are factory jobs. We lost 8,000 factory jobs in December, which was actually less than the 10,000 they thought we were going to lose, but we still lost jobs, and we lost jobs the month before. Trump is saying, well, these tariffs are going to bring back manufacturing. There's no evidence of that in manufacturing. We're still in a manufacturing recession despite the tariffs. Now, we did see a big drop in the trade deficit that was reported today. I think a lot of that, though, had to do with gold, not so much real goods and services. So we'll see what happens next month. But yes, imports are down about 3%. And part of that is because of the tariffs. But the reason that the tariffs are lowering imports is because prices are going up, because foreigners are not eating the tariffs the way Trump promised. Americans are choking on those tariffs. And because tariffs are driving up costs for American consumers, they are naturally buying fewer imported products. Now, they're not necessarily replacing them with U.S. products because we don't make the products. They're just doing without them. That's what's going on. Now, it's also possible that very soon the Supreme Court is going to correctly throw out these tariffs. They are unconstitutional, whether the Supreme Court rules that way or not. That is the proper ruling. The problem is if the tariffs are ruled unconstitutional, that is a fiscal problem because the government has been collecting tax revenue from these tariffs from the American public, either from American businesses or from American consumers. But if they have to stop collecting that money or give it back, that is going to even worsen the current fiscal position of the U.S., which is rapidly deteriorating. The deficits are rising over $3 trillion a year. The national debt is now over $38.5 trillion. Will probably be over $40 trillion by the end of the first quarter of this year. We'll have a $40 trillion national debt. That is why the world is moving away from the U.S. dollar into gold. Now, what we haven't seen certainly not in the back half. Last year was a weak year for the dollar, but the last half of the year, the dollar was kind of flat. And in fact, the dollar index closed today at about a 1-month high, back above 98. But if you're looking at the dollar yuan, the Chinese yuan, the dollar is at a 2.5-year low today. It's back below 7-1, but it's a 2.5-year low. This is significant for many reasons. But one of the ways, in fact, the main way that Trump's economic team described how China was going to eat our tariffs, it was going to be their currency was going to go down. And because their currency was going to go down, that was going to bring down the price that Americans would have to pay for Chinese products. So
this is the classic double-edged sword of trade wars. The promise was that China would pay the price through a weaker currency. Instead, the yuan strengthened, leaving American consumers to face higher costs on two fronts. It's a direct hit to your purchasing power.
Chinese were going to have a weaker currency to offset the impact of the tariffs. So even though the tariffs meant higher prices to Americans, a lower yuan meant lower prices because the dollar would go further. Well, the opposite has happened. The opposite of what Trump's economic advisors said was going to happen has happened. Instead of the Chinese currency going down, right, so that we got a bargain, it went up. So now, not only do Americans have to pay the tariffs to buy Chinese products, but now they have to pay more dollars to get the yuan to buy Chinese products. So it's a double barrel that the American consumer is getting hit with. But it also shows that China's winning the trade war. Their currency is going up. And even though China's exports to the United States have gone way down since Liberation Day, overall exports have gone up. They're just trading more with the rest of the world. They haven't missed a beat. What Americans aren't buying, Europeans are, or people in South America, or people in other Asian countries. Or maybe more Chinese are buying stuff, just the way I said. So China didn't need the United States. It's the United States that needs China. We need China for their products, and we need them to loan us the money, that we need them to buy our treasuries. And that is the other big problem that you're going to have. Look at the yield on the 10-year Japanese government bond, over 2.1%. I predicted last year that the yields on the 10-year Japanese government bond would rise above 2%. They were less than 0.5% when I made the prediction. But rising yields in Japan is going to put a lot of pressure on the Japanese government to sell U.S. treasuries. They are the largest holder of U.S. treasuries right now. They're going to be selling. They're not buying. And of course, the rest of the world is not buying treasuries. They're selling. They're buying gold. They're going to buy more gold. I think central banks will buy more gold in 2026 than they bought in 2025. Not just the central banks that have already been buying, but other central banks who stood by and didn't buy. While other central banks did, they're going to buy, right? They're going to be FOMOing into the gold because they're going to need gold as part of their reserves. I mean, gold last year replaced the treasuries as the largest reserve asset of central banks. That is going to continue. That trend is a massive and important trend that is going to be going on and on for many, many years. And that is also going to fuel demand for gold. But now you're also going to have individual investors really stepping up their demand. They were pretty much absent last year. They're not going to be absent this year. This is going to be the year that Wall Street wakes up and discovers precious metals and the precious metals mining companies. So everything is bullish. And I think, Donald Trump's foreign policy is also going to backfire, just like the tariffs are backfiring, alienating our friends, alienating the countries that we rely on to supply us with goods that we don't produce, to loan us money that we don't save. Look, I have no love for Nicolas Maduro. He's a horrible guy, and so the fact that he's out of there, I guess, is a good thing. But what's not a good thing is that Delcy Rodriguez, who was his, vice president, who was also very close with Chavez and his administration, she's now in charge. She's just as much a socialist as he was. I mean, are the Venezuelan people going to be any better off? Because it's the same government.
Schiff makes a critical point here regarding socialism. Simply changing the figurehead doesn't fix a broken system. Without a free market structure, the economic outcome remains disastrous regardless of who sits in the president's chair.
It's not like, the opposition is now in control or that there's been some kind of rebellion against socialism. Maybe they've rearranged the deck chairs, but the ship's still sinking. So we'll see what happens. I don't like the fact that Donald Trump comes out and says that he's going to be running Venezuela, or he and his team. I mean, his team isn't competent to run anything. I mean, these guys don't understand, economics. I mean, they're just trying to make money for themselves and their friends, as far as I can tell. And they seem to be pretty good at that, because he did bring a lot of people into his administration that have made a lot of money, so they know how to make money, but that doesn't mean they know how to run Venezuela. It doesn't mean that they know how to run America. I mean, nobody should be running America or Venezuela or any country. The free market should be running the country. Those are the countries that succeed, where the politicians don't try to run them, where the politicians stay out. The reason that Venezuela is such a mess is because it was run by the government. And so I don't know if our government's going to run it any better. Right? That is the problem. Governments can't run anything. Look at how they run the post office. Do you think they do a good job with that simple thing? No. anything that you task government to do, it's not going to do it well. It's going to cost way more than it should, and the quality is going to be a lot lower than it should be. That's why you want the government to do as little as possible, and you want the free market to do as much as possible. So I would have much rather had Trump talk about liberating Venezuela from government, not changing who in government runs the country, but trying to return it to a free market. But again, that's not even us. It's not even up to us. It's up to the Venezuelan people to do that. I mean, unfortunately, right? They voted themselves into this mess. They voted in socialism, just like the idiots in New York voted for Maldani, right? And just like Americans have been voting for socialist programs for decades now, right? We do this to ourselves, right? We are our own worst enemy. That is the problem. But the adventurous foreign policy is going to backfire because it is going to lower credibility of America. And I think it is going to make other countries, again, question why they want to embolden and empower the United States by using the dollar as the reserve currency, by handing the United States this weapon, which it then turns and uses against them. Because if it wasn't for the world supporting our currency, we couldn't afford this big military. Donald Trump is making a big deal about how might makes right and how we've got the biggest, stick on the block and, it's our way or the highway, right? That's what he's saying. That's what he's talking about when he's talking about Greenland, right? Donald Trump, hey, we want Greenland. The U.S. is going to acquire Greenland. But he's saying that, well, he'd like to buy it, but if the Danes don't cooperate and sell it to us, or, the people of Greenland don't decide they want to join the United States, he's saying that military option is not ruled out.
The suggestion of using military force for economic acquisition is alarming. This might makes right approach risks alienating global allies and could accelerate the world's move away from the US dollar as a reserve currency.
Meaning, if we can't do a deal, we're going to invade you, we're going to occupy Greenland, we're going to send our troops into Greenland, because that's basically what he's saying when he said, look, we're going to get Greenland, we'd like to buy it, but if we can't make a deal, I'm not going to rule out taking it by military force. What is he saying?